Hi, I'm Scott Kelby, editor of Photoshop User Magazine, and welcome to Getting Great Grayscale Images in Adobe Photoshop. In this video, we're going to take you through a step-by-step process for correcting your grayscale images that's fast, easy to learn, and will have you creating cleaner, crisper, better-looking images in no time. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get right to it. The first thing we need to do before we start correcting our images is to go and set a couple of things in Photoshop to help us get better results when we correct. The first thing you want to do is go under the File menu, under Color Settings, and choose Grayscale Setup. This is where we're going to determine how Photoshop displays grayscale images on screen. When you choose that, the Grayscale Setup box will appear, and it asks what our grayscale behavior is. And you're going to have to ask yourself this question. Are the images that I'm producing, are the grayscale images I'm producing, going to be primarily shown on screen, like on the web or in multimedia or in digital video? In that case, choose RGB for your grayscale behavior. If your images are going to be output to an inkjet printer, a laser printer, or a printing press, in that case, choose black ink for your grayscale behavior, so you have a more realistic view on screen of what your images are really going to look like in their final output stage. So in this case, we're going to choose black ink because we're going to be talking a lot about going to press, even though the things we're going to show you will work on screen and on the web and on press. In this instance, we're going to set our grayscale setup to black ink. Secondly, and this is very important, we're going to be doing a lot of readings using the eyedropper tool. It's one of the most important tools when we're doing grayscale images, but unfortunately the default setting for the eyedropper isn't real great for what we want to do. So double click directly on the eyedropper tool. It's located just below the gradient tool. Just double click directly on it and it brings up the eyedropper options palette. By default, the sample size is point sample. What that means is if you take your cursor and click on an image, well, it's going to get exactly where you click, and it's going to get 1 pixel. Well, rather than getting 1 pixel, what we would prefer to do is get an average of the pixels in that area, so we really get a representation of what we're clicking on. So change your sample size from point sample to 3x3 average. What this does is it keeps you from actually getting a reading from a stray pixel. When it's set to point sample, you can click in your image and actually just land on a weird pixel. By giving you a 3x3 average, you're going to get a much better reading of what's really in the image. So that's your next step. And lastly, I just want to kind of make you aware of something. Let me open up a grayscale image real quick, or just an empty grayscale screen. Another thing I just want to point out to you is, although, take a look at the eyedropper cursor, although it looks like an eyedropper, anytime if you want a very precise reading, just press the caps lock key on your keyboard. You notice that the eyedropper tool changes to the precise cursor. Okay? So anytime when you're working, if you decide, I want to click on exactly the right area, you can always just press the caps lock and it'll change it to the precise cursor. And anytime you want to come back, you can just press the caps lock again. Now let's get into some resolution and scanning issues. The first issue we have to discuss is resolution. And we have to try to answer the question, what resolution do I scan at? Well, if you ask 10 Photoshop experts what the right resolution is, you'll get 10 different answers. It's a very controversial topic. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to give you the resolution that we use, the resolution that I scan at, and that a number of professionals I know scan at. And it's very easy because you don't have to do a lot of math. Here's how we do it. If your image, and we're going to say we're starting with like a 5x7 image. If your image is going to be reproduced at its original size, like you're scanning a 5x7 and you're going to print it as a 5x7, or if you're going to print it at any size smaller than 5x7, or if you're going to print it at maybe up to 20 or 25% larger, we scan everything right across the board at 300 dpi. Okay, so 300 dpi scan at 100% of its original size. The only time we really increase the scanning resolution is if we're going to take a very small image. Let's say that we're going to take a 2x3 image, an image that's 2 inches wide by 3 inches deep, and we have to try to make it an 8x10. Well, to get from that small size to that huge size, you need a lot of resolution. That's an instance where we might scan at 600 dpi or even 1200 dpi. Not that scanning at that higher resolution will make your image crisper, because if you scan a 5x7 at 300 dpi and you scan a 5x7 at 1200 dpi, and they're both going to be reproduced at 5x7 size, you're probably not going to see any difference at all. But if you need to take a small image and make it big, you need that extra resolution, and that's when we scan at a higher resolution. Other than that, and I would say in 95% of our scanning issues, we scan at 300 dpi right across the board. So in this instance, let's start off from it with a raw scan at 300 dpi, and let's go through the step-by-step process of getting a great grayscale image from it. Okay, we've got our raw scan in here, we scanned it in, and now it's time to start working on the image. Well, the first thing we need to do with this particular image, and this will happen an awful lot, is you're going to have to crop and or straighten the image. In this case, we have to do both. We have to crop the image and straighten it. There actually is a crop tool in Photoshop, but they've kind of hidden it. Back in Photoshop 3, it used to be right up front, right here in the tool palette. In Photoshop 4, they kind of hid it back there, but it's still there. To get the crop tool, you just press the letter C for crop, and take a look right up here in the corner. Right, watch right there. When you press the letter C, the crop tool appears. To use the crop tool, you just basically click and drag it out within your image, and you can kind of use the side handles to put it to size and choose the desired cropping for your image. Now, in this case, the image not only needs to be cropped, but it needs to be straightened. Well, one of the nice things about this tool is you can actually crop and straighten at the same time. All you have to do is take your cursor and move it outside the cropping border. And when you do, you can rotate it. So you can rotate and crop at the same time. So let's kind of rotate it. Let's pull it down so we can kind of see where our border is. You need to rotate it back just a little more. You can pretty much dial in right where you need to go to crop and rotate your image. And nothing happens with this cropping tool until you press the return or enter key. So you're in good shape. And incidentally, I need to mention this. We're using the Macintosh version of Photoshop today. It's exactly identical to the Windows version. However, some of the keys on the Macintosh keyboard are slightly different than the keys on a PC keyboard. So to lock in this rotate and crop on a Macintosh, you'd hit the return key. On a PC, you'd hit the enter key. But other than that, everything's exactly the same. So let's go ahead and hit that key, return on Mac or enter on a PC, and it crops and straightens the image at the same time. Now let's go ahead and undo that, because there are also other ways to crop. I'll show you another way to crop that's probably more popular than actually switching to a different tool. Let me switch back to the regular marquee tool. You just press the letter M and you switch back to the rectangular marquee tool. Another way to crop, if you don't have to rotate, is draw a square rectangular selection, put it where you want it, go into the image menu, and then just choose crop. Okay, so put your square where you want it, move it around and position it, and then choose crop. That's probably the most popular way to do it because it saves you changing tools. Let's undo that. And the third way, well, that's the next way to crop. The next way to straighten, to exactly straighten any scan, this is a great little trick. All you have to do is switch to the ruler tool, the measuring tool actually it's called. And we're going to drag across the top edge of your image. So start in one corner and drag. Now you'll notice as soon as I drag, you'll see the info palette appear. It appeared just off screen. There we go. The info palette appears. And it tells you that the angle is 2.3 degrees. Well, it's nice that it tells you that, but in this case, you really don't even need to know that it's 2.3 degrees crooked, because you can just close this, just drag out the ruler, and immediately go under the image menu, under Rotate Canvas, to Arbitrary. And when you go there, it will have already typed in 2.32 and the direction your image needs to go to be straightened. Just click OK and watch your image. It perfectly, exactly straightens your image. So that's a great trick for precisely straightening any scan. Now you can use the other method I just showed you and crop it down just like you like it. And there you go. So there's a couple different ways to crop and straighten your image. Now, this particular image was an image taken from a photograph, but in many cases, actually scanned in from the original photograph, a glossy print. But in many cases, you're going to wind up having to scan in images that have already been pre-printed. If you scan an image that's already been printed once, you're going to wind up with what's called a moire pattern. And what that is a pattern that appears over your image, and it's actually a visible set of either small circles or lines. The technical term for this is a moire pattern. And so if you hear someone refer to, well, that image had a moire pattern, it has a pattern of lines that go all the way across the image. Well, these are caused by the halftone screen that was placed on the image before you scanned it in. Again, this will not happen with photographs. This will happen when you're scanning an image out of a pre-printed piece. Now, I'm going to show you 4 different ways to get rid of that. The first, and the one that works probably about 70 to 75% of the time, is the easiest way. You just choose a filter and boom, it's gone. You go under the filter menu, under Noise, and choose Despeckle. When you run the Despeckle filter, there's no settings to put in, there's no numbers to type, just run Despeckle, and in many cases that will eliminate the moire pattern you see on the image. Let's go ahead and click OK, or just choose Despeckle, and you can see right there that it pretty much removed the pattern. Let's see it before and after. Here's before and after. I'll use the keyboard shortcuts, you can see a little better. Before and after. It pretty much eliminates that. It eliminates it by adding a slight bit of blur to the image. Now, am I concerned that I'm adding a blur to the image? Well, just a little bit. I'm not worried about it because I'm going to go sharpen this image later in this process. But right now, if I have a choice between this or removing that pattern and getting a slightly blurry this, I'll take that second choice every time. So the first line of defense against a moire pattern is go under the filter menu, under Noise, and choose Despeckle. Well, there are many cases where Despeckle will not work. For example, we'll open this image. It's got a horrendous moire pattern on it, as you can see. It's really bad. So, of course, our first line of defense is try Despeckle. Filter, Noise, Despeckle. We'll go ahead and run the Despeckle filter. Well, you can see the image shift a little bit, but it didn't actually remove the moire pattern. So let's undo that. It's very important that if you try and run Despeckle and it does not work, that you go back and undo it. The reason is you just added a little bit of blurring. If it didn't work, you might as well undo it and not add that blurriness. Your second line of defense against a moire pattern is, believe it or not, go under the filter menu, under blur, and choose a Gaussian blur. Now, it may seem kind of crazy. We're actually putting a Gaussian blur to make something look better and sharper, but it has a great effect of getting rid of these type of moires. Let's go ahead and click OK. I'm going to put a 1 pixel a Gaussian blur on this image and watch the image. It wiped it right away. Here's before and here's after. Obviously much better. Now, I'm going to undo it one more time. Go under the filter menu, under blur, and choose Gaussian blur. In many cases, you can get away with less than a 1 pixel Gaussian blur. You can actually go, if you hit the down arrow key on your keyboard, okay, then highlight the field and hit the down arrow key, you can probably get away with a much lower amount. Let's go to 1. Let's turn the preview on so you can actually see our image as we make the changes. Turn preview on, you can see that 0.1 does nothing, 0.2 does nothing, 0.3 starts it, 0.4 is not bad. By the time you get to about 0.8, it's sort of looking pretty good. So if you can get away with doing less, there's 1. Actually, at 3, it takes out quite a bit. But if you can use less than 1, I certainly recommend doing that, because the less amount of blur that you put on now, the less problems you'll have to sharpen up later. So that's our second line of defense. Our third line of defense, if we scan in an image and it has a terrible moire pattern, let's open up this image, is to go under the filter menu, under Noise, and choose the median filter. The median filter is also a great place to try and get rid of moire patterns. Again, this is the third one I would try. Despeckle first, a 1 pixel or less Gaussian blur, and then thirdly, we'll try the median filter set to a radius of 1 pixel. We'll click OK and take a look at the image. Wipes it right out for us. Here's before, and here's after. The fourth way actually doesn't happen in Photoshop. If you've tried all 3 of these and you have a scan that still has such a bad moire pattern that you don't even want to work with it, here's a trick that a lot of people try. Rescan the image, but when you rescan it, when you put the image on your flatbed scanner, slightly angle the image on the bed of your scanner. Just rotate it a little bit to the left or to the right, so you're actually scanning it in crooked. In many cases, that will take out the moire pattern before you bring the image into Photoshop. And incidentally, if all 4 of these don't work, take a look inside your scanning software. In some of today's better scanning plugins, they'll actually have a despeckle filter or a remove screen filter, remove halftone filter in the scanning software itself. I usually leave that off and do it in Photoshop, but if you try these things in Photoshop and none of them work, then I would revert to your scanning software. So there's 4 different ways to deal with moire patterns that might occur in your image. Before we begin actually correcting the images, I'm going to show you a little trick that will help you in just a moment. The trick I'm going to show you is not going to make a lot of sense yet, but when we come to it in just a moment, it'll all become clear. I introduced you earlier to the eyedropper tool that lets you sample areas and get a reading from the info palette. The info palette is located under the window menu by choosing Show Info. And the info palette, you can just watch it as it gives you readings as I go around. Well, there's also another eyedropper tool. If you click and hold on the eyedropper tool, out pops another tool called the Color Sampler tool. It's designed for using color images in color images, and what you can do is actually, instead of just sampling one area where your cursor is, you can lay down samplers in different areas and maybe look at 4 different readings from one different image. Well, we're going to use them as markers to mark particular important parts in our image, parts of the image that we need to know for later. And I just want to show you how it works. To lay out a marker, or they call them a color sampler, you just click once and a little target shows up with the number 1, and the info palette will open up and it gives you the reading in the number 1. We're not concerned with the reading, we're just going to use these for markers right now. So to add a point, to add a color marker, just click and it adds markers. To remove a marker, you hold the Option key, or on PC the Alt key, and you'll notice the cursor change into scissors when you pass over the marker, and you can just remove them. Okay, I'm holding the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC. That's the little trick, so we can use those markers, and you'll see how we use them in just a moment. Now, when it comes to correcting grayscale images, there's one thing we don't ever want to do. We never want to go under the image menu, under Adjust, and choose Brightness and Contrast. This is an incredibly limited tool for doing black and white images. There's basically 2 sliders. One makes it look bad, the other makes it look worse. We never, never, never want to use brightness and contrast. In fact, in this dialog box, there's only one thing worth doing. It's hitting this button right here, Cancel. Never use brightness and contrast. The changes it makes are way, way too global. Instead, when we're doing grayscale images, we go under the image menu, under Adjust, and choose the much more powerful, much more flexible levels. The keyboard shortcut to bring up levels is Command L, or on a PC, Control L. And for the rest of this video, every time you hear me say, let's go to the levels dialog box, or let's bring up levels, I'm pressing that keyboard shortcut, Command L, or on PC, again, it's Control L. This brings up the levels dialog box. Now, it's a huge dialog box. It eats up a lot of screen room, and you can see where we're editing a small image like this, what you'll wind up doing is, unless you have a very large monitor, you're going to wind up kind of moving it out of the way and checking and looking back and forth. Now, the great things about the levels dialog box, I guess the greatest thing about it is this readout, this graph right here in the middle. The name that it's called is the histogram. So what you're seeing is a histogram. And the histogram kind of looks like a mountain range. And what it is basically is Photoshop looking at your image and telling you, this is what I see in your image. I see this mountain range. And a good analogy that I use to explain how levels work, it's kind of like the graphic equalizer in your car stereo. In your car stereo, you've probably got three knobs or sliders, one for bass, one for mid-range, and one for treble. Well, that's kind of like the 3 sliders here in the levels dialog box. This one's for bass, this one's for mid-range, and this one's for treble. Of course, they don't call it that in Photoshop. These are the shadows, these are the midtones, and these are the highlights. Well, in your car stereo, you want a nice rich bass, you want a decent amount of midtones, you don't want them to get too high because they get real annoying, and then you want nice crisp treble, nice crisp highs. That's the same thing that you want out of an image in Photoshop. You want nice rich shadows, you want a good amount of midtones, but you don't want it to be too much, and you want some nice bright highlights. Well, this histogram shows you that. Where that rich base is, there's nothing. There is no rich base. Where the base would be, where a little mountain range would be, there's nothing. There's no deep rich bass in your stereo. Then all of a sudden in kind of the upper lows, it kind of jumps up a little bit. In the midtones, there's lots of midtones in this image, lots of mid-range in your stereo. And then when it comes up to the nice crisp highs for your stereo, boom, there's none. Okay? No real nice bass, no real nice treble, all kind of annoying and low annoying midtones. So on your car stereo, the first thing you do is you'd grab and you'd turn up the bass, and you'd grab and you'd turn up the treble, and you might even bump up the midtone, the mid-range a little bit. Well, that's what we're going to do to this image. There's a couple of different ways to do this, and we're going to show you how. There are actually 3 different methods. There's the automatic way, there's a kind of a semi-automatic way where you kind of do a lot of the work and Photoshop does some of the work, and then manually is to just look at the sliders and grab them. Just look at your image and grab them. First, let's look at the automatic way, because it works, it's a good starting point a lot of times, and a lot of times if you don't really want to spend a lot of time on an image, you can just do the automatic way altogether. Before you do the automatic method, which is just pushing this auto button here, there's something you need to do. If you were going to take this image to a printing press or to output to a printer or something. Basically, we want to make sure that it remains a grayscale image. All right, a grayscale image is made up of shades of gray, and we want to make sure that it's always shades of gray, that it's never completely black and it's never completely white. It's always shades of gray. So one of the things we do is, inside the levels dialog box, we have these eyedroppers, a shadow eyedropper and a highlight eyedropper. What we do is double click on the shadow eyedropper. When you do that, it brings up a special color picker that lives inside the levels dialog box. Now, don't confuse this with the color picker over here. Don't confuse this with the color picker in your toolbox. Although they look the same, it is not the same color picker. Let's bring up levels again using the keyboard shortcut, Command L, or on PC, Control L. What we're going to do is we're going to double click on the shadow eyedropper tool. And inside this dialog box, it says select black target color. What it's asking us is, how black do you really want the darkest parts of the image to be? Well, you'll notice there really isn't a grayscale box in here, so we enter the images, we enter what we want in the CMYK dialog box. Don't let that throw you, because we're not entering anything in cyan, or in fact we're going to enter 0 for cyan, because there's no cyan in a black and white image. There's no magenta in a black and white image. There's no yellow in a black and white image. There is just black, and they use the letter K to denote black. Now, why isn't it CMYKB? Well, because they used B over here for brightness and B over here for blue, so K works great for black here. Now, we don't want our black to get so black that it actually becomes 100% black. Then it's not a grayscale image. There's no detail held in the dots of an image. It's just black. So we lower it to 95. It's just kind of a general overall basic setting, 95. Now, up here in this dialog box, it's kind of hard to see, but it gives you a before and after of your color. Below, it's pitch black. It's night. Just below it is a very, 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 very dark gray, but you actually can see a difference between this black and this gray on your own monitor. So we have 0, 0, 0, and 95, and click OK. You've now set your shadow point to 95%. Now move over to your highlight point and double click on it. Again, it brings up the same color picker, but this time it's saying select white target color. And what that's basically asking is, what color should the whitest, brightest part of your image be? Well, again, we enter these values in the CMYK dialogs, in the fields, excuse me. 0 tab, 0, 0. I'm using the tab key to go from field to field. And then for white, how white do we want white to be? Well, we don't want it to be an actual stark white, because if it goes to actual white, you're not really, if you're printing, you're not really seeing the color white. You're seeing the white paper. So we press 5%. And what 5% does, you can barely see. In fact, even on my own monitor, when I'm looking at it here, I can barely see a difference between the before and after. 5% gray is nearly absolute white, but there's enough of a dot there to hold it if you go to a printing press. So now we've set, by clicking OK, we've set 95% gray as the darkest part of our image, 5% gray as the whitest part of our image. And what that helps to do is ensure that we're not going to have an image that is at any part of it is totally black or totally white. Now, once you've done that, you're set. If all you ever do is grayscale images, you don't have to go back and change these numbers again. In other words, tomorrow when you restart Photoshop, those numbers will already be there. 3 weeks from now, as long as you don't trash your preferences, 3 weeks from now, those numbers will be there. So you only have to do this the first time you start doing your grayscale images. Now, 95's in there, 5's in there. You could go and hit the auto button now, and what Photoshop will do is look at the image over here. It'll look at the image and find out what it thinks is the darkest part, assign it to 95. What it thinks is the lightest part, assign it to 5, and it'll do all the math in between. And it does a pretty amazing job. I'm going to click the auto button now. This dialog box will kind of be off screen. We just have to trust that I'm really clicking the auto button and watch the image when I click auto. Not too bad. It really did a pretty good job. Now, let's go ahead and hit cancel. So if you don't want to actually, if you know that, hey, that's all I need to do right there, that's a pretty decent cleanup, I'm going to do 1,200 images this weekend for my high school yearbook, and I don't want to go through all kinds of adjustments and things. I want to do that trick you just showed me. Believe it or not, there's actually a menu command for it. Image, adjust, and it's called auto levels. And what that does is once you've set those, go ahead and set that 95 and 5 and click OK. But if you don't want to go through any muss or fuss and you just want the quickest, down and dirtiest correction you can get, run auto levels. The keyboard shortcut is Shift Command L, or on PC, Shift Control L. So I'll go ahead and press that now, and here we go. And you get an instant correction. As you can see, that image is dramatically better. The problem with this technique is it doesn't always work, for one, and number two is there's actually a better technique. I'm going to go ahead and undo that and show you the way that we prefer that you do it, because one of the problems is this. Photoshop just looks at the image and it just kind of assigns the darkest part and the lightest part. Well, in this case, we're lucky that the darkest part was probably in the little boy here, Kevin, and the lightest part was probably in his shirt. Well, sometimes, what if the darkest part or the lightest part isn't in the subject? It's in the background. Well, Photoshop doesn't know the difference, and you might wind up with a really great looking background, and the person that you really wanted to look good doesn't look as good, because Photoshop's smart, but it ain't that smart. So a lot of times you'll have to make the decision, because you have to look at every photo and decide what's the most important thing. I can make that decision as a person. I can look at that and say, that little boy, he's what I want to look great. Photoshop might say, that kitchen behind him, I want it to look really good, and it'll do that. Because it's not making a decision based on what's in the image, it's making a decision based on the pixel value in the image. Here's the way we prefer to do it. Go to Levels again. And this is going to be a little disconcerting at first, because you have to turn the preview off. Okay? Now, the technique I'm going to show you works on all Macintoshes and works on most PCs. But some older PCs, this particular technique will not work on. You'll still be able to do what I'm going to show you. You'll have to do it manually rather than having Photoshop help you. But in many cases, on some older PCs, this particular technique will not work. So you'll have to try it on yours to see. If you have a newer PC built within the last few years, it probably should be no problem. Okay, here we go. The first thing we're going to do is we have to determine in this image, we've turned the preview off, we have to determine what is the darkest part and what is the lightest part. Well, we can ask Photoshop to tell us what that is by going under the Image menu, under Levels, turning off Preview like I mentioned. Then what we're going to do is we're going to hold the Option key. On PC, you'd hold the Alt key, and we're going to drag the shadow slider to the right. As I drag the slider to the right, you'll notice the whole screen changes. Watch. The whole screen changes to white. Everything. The dialog boxes blow out, all your menus blow out, everything blows out. That's because of video LUT animation. That's the trick we're using to make this happen. It actually kind of takes over your whole screen, so don't let it freak you out if you Option click or on PC Alt click and the whole screen turns white. That's what's supposed to happen. Take a look inside your image and watch as I drag to the right. The first thing that appears on screen are the darkest parts of the image. Okay? So you can see the darkest parts of the image. Well, you can look in this image and see, well, a lot of it's in the background, but his hair also showed up first. Well, I'm more concerned with him looking good than I am the background, so I now know that right here, this area in his hair is the darkest part of the image. Once I've determined that, I'm going to hit Cancel. I'm going to go grab one of my color samplers, basically just put a marker out there just to help me remember. Boom, that's the darkest part. Darkest part is up there in his hair. I can close this info palette. I'm not reading any readings. I just want to know that the darkest part's there. Now let's go to Levels again. Now I want to find the lightest part of the image. First, turn off the preview box, hold the Option key, and as I drag, the whole screen turns black. Everything turns black. As you drag over, some things start to come back, and watch in the image. Okay? Now you can kind of see, let me move this over a little so you can see. It looks like his shirt is the brightest thing in the image. And actually, you're looking for the thing that should be white, so that's not bad. It is probably a white shirt. So now we can hit Cancel again. Okay, so now we've determined the darkest part's there, and we'll stick a little cursor right here on the lightest part. Again, the only reason we're putting these samplers out is to remind us that's the darkest part, that's the lightest part. Now we can go do our correction. Let's bring up Levels, click on the shadow eyedropper, and click on the darkest part. Well, the darkest part's up in his hair, so we'll click right there. Secondly, the lightest part of the image is on his shirt, so we'll click the highlight eyedropper, this eyedropper right here, and then click on what we marked as the lightest part of the image. Now, here's where we want to take it one step further, and here's where you can do one better than Auto Levels will do. A lot of times, especially if you're going to a printing press, you'll get the image looking great on screen, you go to press and it prints a lot darker. Well, that's because of dot gain. When ink hits paper, it starts to spread, and generally your image will print a little darker than it looks on screen. Well, one of the things we can do to help guard against that, either on an inkjet printer or on a printing press, and even on screen it actually looks visually better, is to increase this midtones. We call it bumping the midtones. There isn't an exact number I can give you. There's no number that you can look up because you've probably noticed that these little sliders correspond with these 3 number fields above. But basically this is a visual correction where you look at the image and you say, I'm going to move the midtones a little to the left. And it just brightens the overall image. Well, it brightens the midtones in the image, but it gives the effect of brightening the overall image. What this does is it brings out a lot of lost detail in background areas and in hair and things like that. So we always bump the midtones just a little bit. You look at the image, slide it a little to the left, and then hit OK. Now let's look at our before and after. Let me blow up the image a little. Here's before, and here's after. Just by adding the highlights, the shadows, and moving the midtones a little to the left. It's a tremendous difference between that and that. The image looks crisper and brighter. Now let's go ahead and remove those color samplers. Let's just hold the Option key or on PC the Alt key and get rid of those. Now let's go back, go to the Image menu, under Adjust to Levels one more time. Well, do you remember there was no data up here whatsoever? And there was no data down here whatsoever? It was just all gone? Well, now you can see we have a full range of data, and that's kind of what we're looking for. It has dropped off a little here at the bottom. It's gone all the way to the top pretty much. It's going pretty good, a little bump in the midtones. That's fine. And then there's a lot of shadow detail down here, and then it kind of just drops off. If it looks a little too washed out, you can manually just grab this and drag it over and increase. If it looks like it needs a little more contrast, and bring it up to what we call the bottom of the hill, where the hill really first starts, maybe about right there. Over here is a little too light. Bring it to the bottom of the hill and click OK. And you can see that the image has much more contrast now between that couple little correction of just setting the highlight, setting the shadow, and then bumping the midtones a little bit. So that's the basic way we're going to make our adjustments. Again, you can do it manually. The 3 ways are auto levels, which we showed you, and again you can use either choose it from the menu or use the keyboard shortcut Shift Command L or on PC Shift Control L. The second way is to go to Levels, turn off Preview, and find the highlights and shadow points yourself and mark those. And the third way, of course, is just a manual way. It's just to open up the image, go to Levels, and drag the sliders until you think it looks good. Dragging this way increases the shadows, dragging this way increases the highlights, and dragging to the left here increases the midtones. So there's 3 different ways using levels that make your image look much, much better. Now, we've got some other things to deal with resolution and line screen. Let's go on to that next. The next thing we have to look at this stage, now let's kind of recap. We've straightened and cropped the image. We've gotten rid of any moire pattern if there was one. Luckily, this one, there was not a moire pattern in because it was just a scan off a print. And then next we went to the levels, we set our highlight, our shadow, and we bumped the midtones a little bit, and we've hit OK. The next thing we have to ask ourselves is, where is this image going to be output? This is critical. In this case, let's say that we're going to go to a printing press. We'll start with the printing press first, and we'll look at the web and things like that. Okay, let's say that we're going to a printing press. The next thing we have to do is call up the print shop that's printing the job and ask them, what is the line screen of this job? What's the line screen that this is going to be printed at? They'll be able to tell you immediately. The reason you need to know this is because this determines your resolution. Your resolution is handled under the image size dialog box under the field called resolution. Now, you remember we scanned this in at 300 dpi. Now, dpi is used in scanner measurement, but once your image is in Photoshop, we really don't refer to it as dpi anymore because your image is actually made up of pixels. So you'll always hear it referred to as you have a 300 ppi or pixels per inch image. So at this point, a lot of people use dpi and ppi interchangeably. They're not really the same thing. dpi is used to measure laser printer and scanner resolution. ppi is once your image is in Photoshop, how many pixels per inch. Well, now that we know that, why do we need to know the line screen? Well, once they tell you the line screen, you can actually lower your resolution and keep the same quality in your image, okay? So why would you want to lower your resolution image? Well, there's a number of reasons. Number one is larger images print slower. So if you have a smaller image, obviously it's going to print out of your laser printer or out of your printer or out of your image setter faster if it's a smaller file size. Secondly, just the whole file size issue. When you do have large files, it takes up a lot of room on your hard drive. It makes everything go slower. It makes Photoshop run slower. So if you can work with a lower resolution image and still get great quality, still get quality that is no different than it would be at a higher resolution, why wouldn't you do it? So we call the print shop and they say, okay, we're going to be printing this image at, and they'll give you a figure. I'll give you the three most common figures. The three most common resolutions used probably in the country today are 85 line screen is a very, very popular one. That's usually used for like newspapers and maybe some yellow pages. Most newspapers, 85 line screen. 100 line screen is used by quickie print shops and things like that. 133 line screen, 133, is used for most magazines. Most magazines you see on the newsstand or color brochures you're going to run into are 133. And then high quality magazines and high quality, very high quality brochures and annual reports can be 150 line screen, 200 line screen, even higher. But the most prevalent ones you're going to run into are 85, 100, and 133. So let's say that we called the print shop and they told us 85. What can we do? Well, once they told us 85, we can use the basic rule of thumb. The basic rule of thumb is you can double that number, and that's all you need for your resolution, doubling the number. So we'll type in 170. That's 85 line screen times 2 is 170. I can now lower the resolution of this image to 170, and you'll see what happens. It takes your file size from 365K down to just 117K. So I've got a very small file that'll print very, very quickly, but I've lost absolutely there's no loss of quality that's visible by the human eye, by the naked eye in this image. So if you can lower the resolution, if your file size will be smaller, if Photoshop will run faster, and it'll print quicker, and it still looks the same, there's no reason not to lower the resolution. So in this stage, we always do this. There's also a bonus. When you lower resolution, remember the moire patterns we had earlier? We were dealing with trying to use despeckle and the median filter and a 1 pixel Gaussian blur and turning the scan. If none of those work, usually lowering the resolution will. So if none of those work, just continue on with your correction. When you get to this point where you're going to drop the resolution, this may do the trick too. And in more cases than not, this will work if the others don't. Now, so we double the line screen to get the resolution. And we enter it in and click OK. Now, I got to tell you, this double the line screen has been a standard for years. It's actually gotten to the point where many people think, that doubling the line screen thing is outdated. That now that they're saying 1.5 times, 1.5 times the resolution is all that you need. And then some people are even going as far as saying, really, the research shows that 1.2 times the line screen is all you need. But to this day, I still use double the line screen, and let me tell you why. Well, there's two reasons. Number one, I can do the math in my head. 2 times 85, 170, that I can do. 1.5 times 85 is a little trickier for me. But more importantly is this. If I lower the resolution from 300, let's just say I go down from 300, there we were, down to 170. And I take this image into a page layout program like Adobe InDesign or Quark Express or PageMaker, what have you. I put the image in there and I think, wow, I really wish I'd made this a little bit bigger. Well, if I use double the line screen, I can actually, in Adobe InDesign or PageMaker, Quark, whatever, I can actually just stretch it. I can stretch it up to about 20% larger and the image won't fall apart on me. However, if I use 1.5 times the line screen or 1.2 times the line screen and I need to make the image a little bigger, I can't stretch it. If I did, you'd see immediate damage and immediate pixelization to the image. It'd start to fall apart immediately. So as a rule of thumb, I use double the line screen. That way I always have a little insurance policy if I have to make my image size larger. So in this case, we're going to pretend we're going to line screen. We call the print shop. They said 85 line screen, so I'm going to double it and click OK. And you'll see after I click OK and lower the line screen that the image still looks fine. Still looks exactly the same. Now I'm going to undo that image size, and I just want to, let me shoot that down for you. There we go. I'm going to just bring one more thing to your attention. In the image size dialog box, there's actually a button called Auto. And what Auto lets you do is basically it does the math for you. You enter what line screen you want and choose a quality rating of best, good, or draft. Best quality gives you double the line screen. Good quality gives you 1.5 times the line screen. And draft gives you 72 dpi, which is just enough resolution to view on screen or use on the web. So if you don't want to do the math, you can always go to the auto resolution. It's this little button right here in the image size dialog box, and it'll do the math for you. At least it keeps you from grabbing for your calculator while you're working. Okay, so we're going to back to our project. Let's recap real quickly. We scanned in the image, 300 dpi, we rotated it, we cropped it, we got rid of any moire patterns, we went and we used levels to set the highlight and shadow. Now we've called the print shop, they told us the resolution, it's 85 is this line screen, and so we double it to 170. And bring it up. And you notice the image looks perfect, so there's nothing else we can do at this point. We've lowered the line screen, the file size is better. Now let's move on to sharpening your image. At this point in our step-by-step process, we're going to add some sharpening back. Every time you scan in an image, you lose a little sharpness. Every time you adjust it and start making all these changes, you start to lose a little quality, especially if you had to despeckle or add a moire or a Gaussian blur, any of that stuff to remove a moire pattern, then you really have some softening. But it doesn't matter, even if we didn't do any of that stuff, we want to sharpen every image that we do off a flatbed scanner, even off a slide scanner, or even off a photo CD. So when we do this towards the end, we're almost at the very end of the correction process, so what we're going to do is we're going to apply a filter that sharpens for us. It's under the filter menu, under sharpen, it's called unsharp mask. Now it sounds like anything called unsharp mask would make things look not sharp. It sounds like make them blurry, but actually don't let that throw you. The term unsharp mask is a holdover from traditional darkroom methods where they used to sharpen an image by making a copy of the image and blurring one and kind of shooting a new plate. It's a long story. I'm not going to go into all that, but the important thing is that we've got an unsharp mask filter that'll do it for us. Now I'm not going to go into explain all of the amount and radius and threshold, what all these mean, because number one, it's all included in your Adobe Photoshop manual. Number two, it's wildly boring. So instead, I'm going to give you 3 settings that are in wide use by photographers and pre-press people around the country, so you can apply them yourself and find out which one of these 3 settings that you like, and once you've started to play with it, then you can determine, even come up with your own settings. The first setting I'm going to give you is a setting of 150 for the amount, 1 for the radius, and 10 for your threshold. 10 for your threshold. This is a setting that seems to work well when the subject in the image is of a softer nature. 151 and 10 works nice on people, on flowers, on puppies, on things that are kind of delicate, where the actual subject of the image is of a more delicate, softer nature. 151 and 10. For images that are have very defined edges, like if you're taking pictures of buildings or of trucks or of money or something that has, coins, something that has a very defined edge, then try these settings. 65, 4, and 3. This is a lot of sharpening. It's very, very evident. And in that case, it is a bit, you'll notice it's a very dramatic correction or unsharpening that happens to your image rather than the 151 and 10, which is very subtle. And I'll show you my overall favorite setting. My favorite setting that I use pretty much for just general images is 85, 1, and 4. As far as ranges go, you want to go anywhere between about 75 and 150 maximum on the amount. On the radius, in most cases, you want to go 1 or 2 pixels. In that extreme example I showed a minute ago, 65, 4, and 3, is where you open up an image and it's visibly blurry, or it's got such clearly defined edges that it doesn't hurt things. But in most cases, your radius is going to go 1 to 2 pixels. Your amount's going to go anywhere from 75 to maybe 150, and your threshold's going to go up to about 10, not much higher than that. Anywhere from like 0 to 10 is fine. In this case, I'm showing you the 85, 1, and 4. I'm going to go ahead and use this one. When I watch this, it's a subtle effect. It's not supposed to knock you out. If it knocks you out, then generally something's wrong. But let's go ahead and apply. We're going to hit OK and watch the image. Watch in his hair and his eyes and watch how it works. Here we go. All right, there it is. Here's before, and here's after. Kind of look right here in his hair. In fact, let me go ahead and actually apply a higher amount of sharpening than we should. I'm going to exaggerate it here on the screen. We'll do the 65, 4, and 3. That's really, in real life, a higher amount that I would apply, but I want you to see it real clearly on the screen here. Watch, here's before, and there's after. As you can see, that's too much. But it kind of gives you an idea of how it sharpens. Look at his hair here, and then watch it sharpen. Look at his clothes, and especially in here, and it immediately sharpens up. That's a little too much. Now, if you apply a filter, like an unsharp mask filter, and it is too much, you have 2 choices. You can go back and lower the settings, or here's a really neat trick. Go under the filter menu, and under the last filter that you run appears at the top. unsharp mask. But right under it is a thing called fade unsharp mask. This is so slick. You know what this is? This is undo on a slider. That's right, here's the full filter, here's zero, no filter whatsoever, and you have a preview so you can see what it looks like, and this is anything in between. So you can kind of say, yeah, I went a little far on that, but that looks pretty good somewhere right in there, and click OK. So that way you've gone back and faded the filter, you've applied an unsharp mask, and you've faded it. So it's not too intense, you have a lot of control over how it goes on. I use that with sharpening all the time. Now, I want to back up. I'll show you another thing you can do. Let's go to the history palette. I'm going to back up. Let's remove the unsharp mask, the fade, and then the unsharp mask to get back to where we started. Here we go. So here is the pre-unsharp mask. Instead, another thing I try is this. I will apply an 85, 1, and 4, 85, 1, and 4, run it once. If it doesn't seem quite sharp enough, I'll run it again. Ooh, now that looks pretty good. That looks really nice. You could really see how it sharpened up his eyes, little catch lights start to show up in his eyes. His hair looks good, everything looks good. He doesn't look too crisp. I'll try that a lot. In most cases, one unsharp mask will do it. If you run an unsharp mask and it's not enough, you can either do one of those two things. Apply a heavier unsharp mask and use fade, or run the unsharp mask 2 times. The important thing is that every single image you do, before you save it, run an unsharp mask to bring some of the sharpness that was lost when you originally acquired the image. If we're going to save our image, there are a couple of file formats that work great for black and white. Probably the most popular file format for black and white is to save the image in TIFF format. TIFF format is supported by just about every program out there. Even programs like Microsoft Office and things like that will support TIFF. So TIFF is probably the most popular format for taking your image into another application. If you're not going to take your image into another application, if you're just going to print it out in Photoshop, you can just save the image in Photoshop format. It's really not necessary to save it as an EPS in most cases. TIFF will work for most everything else that you want to do. Oh, incidentally, another note here. Before you apply your sharpening in the last step, I mentioned what happens if we go to press, or I mentioned about doubling the line screen. Well, what if you're not going to a press? What if you're going to like a Kodak color inkjet, or a Epson color inkjet, HP color inkjet? Well, the line screen of those is actually, the comparative line screen of those is very low, and in most cases we use 130 resolution. Now, if that seems a little low to you, the best thing to do is do a test. Scan an image once at 300 ppi, scan another image at 300 ppi, lower it to 130, and print them both out side by side and see if you can notice a visible difference when printed to one of those printers. Now I know what you're thinking. Well, those printers print at 1440 dpi. How can a 130 ppi image work? Don't confuse dpi, which is used to measure the resolution of scanners and printers, with Photoshop's resolution of ppi. Remember, resolution is really based on, for our purposes in Photoshop, is based on the line screen, not the DPI of the printer. Okay, one more question. What if we're just going to the web? Well, if you're just going to the web, you can lower it all the way down to 72 DPI. Again, after I lowered it to 72 DPI, I would still go back and add the sharpening just like we did. Sometimes one of the best ways to get a great grayscale image is to start by scanning a color image. A lot of times you're going to wind up with a color image that needs to be converted to grayscale anyway. But believe it or not, some scanners will scan a black and white image much better if you put the black and white image on the scanner and actually scan it in color mode as if it was a color image, and then convert it to grayscale in Photoshop. Or you can just scan a color image and convert it to grayscale as well. In this case, we've scanned a color image and we're going to convert it to grayscale. Now, if you just go under the image menu, under mode, and choose grayscale from an RGB color image, what happens is, but Photoshop says discard color information, and that's about what it does. You click OK and it throws away the color image and gives you an incredibly dull, lifeless looking grayscale image. You probably already realized that. Well, then you have to go through some hoops to make it look good. So instead, let's do this. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to duplicate the image. I'm going to show you a better way to convert from color to grayscale. First, we'll do the standard one so you can see it before and after. Here's a grayscale image. We'll shrink it down a little so you can, there we go. So there's our original. We basically scanned in a color image and threw away all the color. Here's a better way to do it. Instead, go to your channels palette. Just choose channels, or actually go up under the window menu and choose show channels. Well, now it says hide channels because it's visible, but choose show channels, and your channels will come up. And in many cases, I would even say most cases, there'll be a separate channel that looks better than the conversion you would get if you go to Photoshop and just choose Grayscale. Let's take a look. Let's look at the blue channel first. You can look at these channels individually, incidentally, by just clicking on them. Well, does that look like a good Grayscale image? Yuck. Let's look at the green. That ain't bad. Let's look at the red. Wow, that's pretty good. That actually looks like an image that's been corrected already. I mean, that really's got some nice highlights, some nice shadow detail. Look in his shirt, there's lots of nice, dark areas there and lots of bright areas. Let's compare this one channel with what Photoshop did over here with its default. I mean, look at the difference. Look at the detail in his hair and her hair versus what happened when you took a color image and just choose Grayscale mode. So you can get a lot better looking image by going this route. Take a look. Look at the difference. There's one, and there's the other. Pretty startling difference. This image is much better and has a lot better contrast. Okay, that's one way to do it. Here's another way to do it. Let's start over. Let's revert this image. Actually, that's kind of huge. There we go. Let's revert this image. What we're going to do this time is I'll make another duplicate so we can see a before and after. This time we just choose Grayscale. Here's a way that a lot of people like to do it. This next way is a very popular way to convert from color to Grayscale. Instead of just going up in the image menu and choosing Grayscale, instead choose Lab Color, LAB Color. When you do that, take a look at the channels palette. You'll see there's a lightness channel, an A, and a B. And the trick that a lot of people like to do is this. You want to keep the lightness channel and remove A and B. Now, when I drag B in the trash, don't freak out that you're not going to see A left. Watch what happens. You drag B in the trash, and you get alpha 1 and then some awful looking thing. Well, it's really pretty easy. You want to keep the one that looks good and dump the one that looks like that. So dump alpha 2 in the trash, and you've got a pretty good looking alpha channel. Now, a lot of people at this point like to go in and add sharpening now to just the brightness channel. They'll actually go and throw an unsharp mask now. Let's go ahead and throw an 85, 1, and 4 unsharp mask in there now. Okay, let's take a good look at the effects of the sharpening. Watch. Let me just kind of move it over a little bit. Here's before sharpening and after. Look at her eyes and look at her hair in here. Before, after. Then you go convert to Grayscale mode. Now, let's compare this image with this image. There's the dull Photoshop conversion, and there's the nice, bright, crisp other version. It's crisper, it's brighter. Now, if you do this, if you try this LAB method, and it looks like it's a little too bright, and in some cases that'll happen, here's a great trick. Make a duplicate of the background layer by dragging it to the new layer icon at the bottom of the layers palette. So now you've got your original image and a duplicate of it right on top. Let me just blow this up one more level so you can see. Now, once you've done that, switch the layers blend mode from normal to multiply. Now, chances are this is going to make it too dark, which it did. But that's okay, because you can go into the opacity slider and dial in the perfect grayscale image. You can say, okay, well, I didn't want a whole bunch. This is, again, kind of undo on a slider in this particular instance, the way we're using it here. You can kind of say, well, I need a little more shadows. This was too bright. This was too dark. I need something in between, maybe something right in there. Then once you've done that, once it looks good, you can flatten the image, and you've got a great looking grayscale image to start with. So now you don't have to go back and try to create miracles in the levels dialog box, because you're starting off with a better version right up front. One more way, let me give you one more method. There's actually a number of different methods, but let me give you another one. Let's revert this image. Okay, and we'll make a duplicate. We'll start by taking the original and making it just grayscale. Next, what we can do is let's go under the image menu and choose calculations. Now, this is a gigantic and intimidating looking dialog box, okay? But what it does is very, very simple, okay? The problem is, by default, the preview is turned off. So you would have to guess what your image is going to look like. And let me just tell you real quickly what this does. What this does is it lets you say, okay, your image is kissing cheek, copy, which is that image back there. You're working on the background layer. And we're going to take the red channel, and if we think the red channel looks good, we're going to combine it with either another red, or a green channel, or a blue channel to create a new channel. So we're basically taking two channels and creating a new channel. The nice thing is we can choose different blending modes, like you know how we just chose multiply, made it much darker? Well, in this case, we can choose a blending mode and how much opacity. We can do it all in one channel. All in one dialog box, and we can either create a new channel or a whole new document with the image. Well, let's go back and look at our image real quick. In the channels palette, we've got a red, a green, and a blue. The blue looks awful. The green looks not too bad. The red looks real good. What if we could create a combination of the red and the green together to create a brand new image? So let's do that. It would be Grayscale. Let's go ahead and take a look. So let's go back to our RGB image, choose calculations, and say, okay, I know the red channel looks good. I know the green channel looks good. Here's the key. Turn the preview checkbox on, and you can see what your final image is going to look like. Well, because you're in multiply mode, it looks kind of dark. Let's try normal mode. Wow, that's a little better. Let's try instead multiply, but let's lower that opacity to maybe 20%. Not bad. Maybe even 15%. Or let's try two red channels together. Wow, that brightened up pretty well. Might even brighten a little too much. Let's try 25%, 30%. Well, you can just sit here and dial in your ultimate grayscale image. And when you're done, in this case, it created a new alpha channel, or what you could have done was gone to calculations, say I want a red channel and another copy of the red channel in multiply mode at 30%, but in this case, what we're going to do is instead of creating a new channel, let's create a whole new document. Click OK, and then it creates a brand new great grayscale image for you. Now you would go through all the steps that I showed you earlier in the video. Now you'd go through and check the levels, you'd go ahead and add your sharpening and lowering your line screen, all that kind of stuff. But that way, you're starting off with a better image. That's 3 great ways right in a row to go from color to grayscale and get better looking images. Well, there you have it. I think you can see that correcting grayscale images really isn't hard at all. In fact, it can be a lot of fun, especially now that you've learned the secrets of getting great grayscale images every time. If you're interested in learning more about Adobe Photoshop, check out my other training videos at www.photoshopvideos.com. I'm Scott Kelby. Thanks for watching.